I'm Helen Armitage.
And I'm Chris Webb.
And you're listening to The Next Normal, the podcast that explores the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had and continues to have on different individuals, organisations and sectors spanning the world of business, education and careers.
On The New Normal, we heard from a range of individuals about how they were adapting to a challenging climate. And we're now taking this one step further as we look to the future and quiz another slate of fantastic guests about how they're planning for the unknown, what different sectors are doing to adapt, and whether any green shoots of optimism are starting to appear in the wake of the pandemic and subsequent lockdown.
Thank you for joining us as we explore what the next normal might look like for all of us on a local, national and global scale.
Good morning and welcome to The Next Normal. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Helen Armitage. Helen, how are you doing today?
Yes, very well today, thanks Chris. Not too bad. It's Friday, first week of curriculum delivery down. So yeah, going good. Yeah, how about you?
Good, very positive. Yeah, busy 2 weeks, I think, for all of us at the moment at the university. But I think it's looking positive as much as it can do when you can't see anyone's face on a screen. But still going okay. And we're very, very pleased today to be joined by Careers and Technical Education Partnership Director, Alex Willans, who's based in Bradford. So, Alex, very good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Super excited to be here today. I've been looking forward to it all week, so ready to start.
Oh, fantastic. That's great to hear. And Alex is going to tell us a little bit more in a minute about her role and kind of what she's involved in, as the sort of focus of today's episode is really about the future of education, something that's been really kind of thrown into focus with some of the recent announcements around lifetime skills guarantee, some of the things that happened in the summer in terms of the, I guess we can only call it the exam results fiasco. And so a lot of kind of news stories that have really been based around what's happening with education, what might be changing. And so that's going to be the focus of our episode today. But before we get into that, our Gloombuster for the week are good news stories. So Helen, coming to you first, any good news stories to share?
Yeah, so a bit of a personal one. So as I said, it was first week of curriculum delivery for me this week. I've been in a few sessions throughout the department and one particular stood out for me. So it was a first year graphic design session. My first session delivering online synchronous into the studio and also to students on Zoom as well who were shielding at home. So I could not have done it without the support of the academics who were absolutely brilliant. They were facilitating in the studio to make sure that those students were on task. And at first it felt a bit strange to have myself voice and kind of face beaming down on students that were in the studio without me being there. Felt a bit like the Wizard of Oz, but yeah, it went absolutely brilliantly well. The students enjoyed it, academics enjoyed it, and I've got a few more coming up throughout the rest of the semester. So yeah, good times.
Fantastic, good news. A bit of plate juggling, always good at the start of the academic year, by the sound of things. Alex, any good news stories you'd like to share with us this week?
Hi, yes, Chris. One of the stories that resonated with me this week was around scrapping Gcses. My first reaction was actually this is a really positive step. Whether it's scrapping GCSEs or some sort of conclusion, is really important that they come to that sooner rather than later. The well-being of young people and educators is fundamental. There's a lot of pressure at the moment. It's definitely a story to watch in the news. My child is one of those students who's in his second isolation period since September. So he was disbanded for 14 days. We're back for 2 days and then another 14 days. There is a widening gap, as we know, between those students who don't have the environment at home and facilities at home to be able to study independently, and increased pressure on staff to provide different forms of learning whilst they're teaching as well. So a very different place to where we were back in March, April when learning was going on, and we do not need a repeat of this debacle. So there's a lot of high profile names behind this. I think it's definitely, as I said, a story to watch.
On a kind of personal note, I suppose, there's been a redundancies through COVID, so super excited that I've got a friend this week who started her first job, and also a family member who's got CAD engineer. So super excited that they've kind of fallen on their feet and found something to move forward with, which is great news that there are jobs out there for people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is something we're always really keen to stress, because there's just so much in the media at the moment around scarring and sort of hopelessness and people giving up. And I think it's that sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's good good to get some of the positive stories out there and encourage people, not to give up, basically, which is good. After those two quite inspirational good news stories, I feel I'm somewhat lowering the tone with mine this week, as I discovered a miracle invention called the coffee AeroPress this weekend, which is basically like a cafetiere without any of the mess, and no electricity, although very similar to a cafetiere, but it's just great. I love my coffee, and this is now kind of my new best friend, the AeroPress. So I'm not really a coffee nerd, but that is my good news story, and I'm sticking with it. So there we go.
Coffee influencer next, Chris. That's the next career path, maybe. Okay, Alex. So we'll just kick off then. If you just start by telling us a bit of an overview of how COVID has impacted your work, your job role, your life since we've been in lockdown since March.
Hi, thank you. So it's been quite interesting. I think that we are very conscious that the work that we do is primarily facilitating the work between industry and the skills that are needed for young people and working with schools. So since March, obviously, people have had a focus on making sure their business stays afloat, redirecting staff, furloughing staff. Our schools have been under a lot of pressure, as have every school in the country, to stay open, to look after the well-being of young people. So what it has done for us actually is provided an opportunity for us to build a backstory in a system. So we reset what we were doing in November last year, which was more about sort of still doing what we're doing in terms of industry. And I can explain a little bit about the CTE model as well behind that. So which might be helpful to put some context around this. But we reset our thinking. So we still have the basic bread and butter, which is to build industry-driven system pathways for young people. What we're trying to do, though, is transparency and visibility around that. And we have a CRM that we're developing. So it's allowed us to have a little bit of time to step back and look at that and spend time on that. As anybody knows who's bringing tools and systems in, they're quite onerous and they do take a lot of time on top of your day job as well. So that's been super great. Still keeping contact with schools, still keeping contact with our industry partners, just to stay what's going on. But generally sort of then working from home, looking at digital stuff and systems and learning all the lovely things around teams and how to do things. Well, one of the exciting things we did this year is we have a CTE Awards, which recognises the talent of young people. So schools are able to nominate young people for industry sector work that they've done. So maybe a student in business, a student in health and social care. We've got 15 different industry sectors. How have they performed? So it would be schools, colleges that would nominate their young people for all of the brilliant work that they do. We moved that online. So that was a mean feat for us, actually, quite a challenge, but it was great to still make sure that those awards went out, because everything we do is about young people and making sure we support them. And I think that this time now forever is about raising esteem for young people and making them feel that there's definitely something out there for them.
Absolutely, Alex. And
Yeah,
I think,
definitely.
as you sort of said a minute ago, there's a lot of work that you're doing in kind of partnership from an industry point of view, but also with young people. So I suppose what might be a useful starting point is just to find out a little bit more about the Careers and Technical Education partnership that you work in. And I guess for those who maybe aren't familiar with CTE and sort of the model of education that you're talking about, can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. So as I've mentioned, it's a partnership that builds industry-driven career pathways. The ideology behind that really is that education, training and workforce systems stay responsive to the labour market. The idea we prepare students with the right skills and knowledge and experiences and qualifications they need to move into work. So that's essentially the kind of ideology behind it. So the career pathway system really aligns the public sector and industry to engage in an honest conversation that's going to help people, if they're in schools or industry partners, sort of close that skills gap. But hopefully it also prepares them for jobs and careers. So it's the employability skills. But in addition to that, contextualising the learning within the curriculum in different types of ways. So I suppose in Bradford, CTE and the district partnership is that vehicle for doing that. And we have a number of partners, excellent partners that do that work. And it's trying to bring it all together, which is never an easy feat. Partnership working to make sure, I think the blessing that we have is that we have all of our partners with the same end goal, and that is to develop the skills of young people and raise attainment. And that's the perfect thing. There's just the nuances and the great sort of conversations that we have around how we all do that. So in terms of CTE, we have 15 different industry areas, and that ranges from health and social care through to advanced manufacturing and engineering, the built environment. Behind those 15 industries, got 79 pathways. So for example, behind the built environment, you've then got pre-construction, construction and post-construction. So it kind of builds up a bigger picture. The actual idea behind developing the skills is around embedding that approach to contextualise the learning, but focusing on local LMI data to make sure we're really getting it right. So is the curriculum being delivered supporting students moving to work? Does it have that kind of transitional skill set? I'm really fortunate that I've got an amazing core team, absolutely amazing. So we have primary lead that works across our primary schools that look, and she's doing some fantastic work to look at how careers related learning is embedded into the primary curriculum. Our secondary leads work across, well, they work across post sort of 14, and they're building in this year the key stage 3 elements. So actually we've got the transition, and then we have got then a focus from 4-year-old all the way to 19 to develop those industry pathways. The work that we do is supported by local partnerships, it's supported by the LEP, it's supported by the KEC, who are also our partnership working, it's supported by various different industry donations really. I think Bradford's quite special because around growing your own talent, specifically in our healthcare system, the motto is grow your own. So when they fund part of our work, it's very much about how do we grow our own and let our young people know what's out there. And obviously health and social care is a massive growing industry. What they do as well is they also look to see where the gaps are in the industry. So every year we look at critical occupations, identify what they are across the different industry boards. So our makeup really is industry boards. We currently have 7 different industry boards, and they range from, as I've mentioned, built environment, we've got business board, we've currently just started our public sector and law board, and we have 2 further boards to come on, and that's transport, logistics and distribution, and also the tourism and leisure industry and sport. So they're next to come on board. And then we feel like we've got the full set of industry partners to help lead this and move it forward. In terms of contextualising the learning, I suppose there's loads of stuff I can go on, but I'll just shut up for now.
That's brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much. That overview is absolutely amazing, and I'm sure our listeners will be really keen to hear more about this as we progress through the podcast, and probably research into it afterwards as well. Right, okay, so this is our top of the pod section of the podcast. So Alex, over to you. Have you got any recommendations of podcasts that you're listening to at the moment?
I do actually. I dip into podcasts every now and again. I'm not driving as much for work, so they don't often go on. It was often quite either a Radio 4 or a podcast. So at the moment, I suppose the most recent one I looked at was Your Brain at Work. So it's based on the neuroscience and the work of David Rock. So this particular one was performance engagement, looking at conversations, looking at how we can manage performance management in COVID. So that's quite a good one to look out for. In addition to that, my go-tos probably might be Tara Bach. So a bit of meditation, a bit of chill, and just kind of take me away from things. Or another one that I tend to go to every now and again is Helen McCarthy, Circular Economy. That's always quite a good go-to. I quite like the transcend into any industry and to any type of thinking as well.
Fantastic recommendations. I'm sure our listeners will be downloading those and subscribing and definitely listening in. Thank you. That's great. So you've mentioned the size of this project and the scalability, how it is growing, and there's big numbers in there. But it's great to hear that everyone's got the same end goal. I really like that you've kind of nailed that down at the start. That's really positive to hear. I'm just wondering, because with that kind of size does bring some challenges. So how is this a challenging kind of typical model of education that is going to exist in the UK? What do you think are the challenges of kind of implementing this model?
If you'd asked me pre-COVID, I might have had a slightly different answer for you. I suppose at the minute that kind of one of the things that come front of mind is actually looking at accessibility. So in the past, where we'd have taken students on tour and talks, we'd have taken them out on industry visits, all of that kind of great stuff. There's restrictions around that now. So we're very much kind of with our learning partners and with our other providers, looking for ways to make that digital. That again presents its challenges. We're aware that a number of young people in Bradford don't have access to digital provision at home or adequate provision. It's a luxury. People see it as normal, don't they? They see it as everyday bread and butter to have Wi-Fi. That's not always the case in some households, so we need to be mindful of that. Or it's a shared device, and so we definitely need to think about equity there. We definitely look for ways to, I suppose, that the challenge is more ways to contextualise the learning. Sometimes I come from a practical subject previously, so For me, it seemed very simple to contextualise the learning. Coming from a design technology point of view, everything's practical. You kind of need those live case studies, those live briefs to get things moving. That kind of teamwork approach doesn't always fit as easily in other subjects. And when you've got curriculum to deliver and you need to get that through. So there's definitely some sort of give and take there. So that can sometimes be a challenge. I think more so now, schools are going back and they have time gaps that they just want to look at retention and they just want to look at knowledge and memory for learning. So they've got some really key focuses. So it's about sort of how that then looks. Again, what we have got though is we've got a really clear Ofsted framework where careers is part of that. So the balance for schools is really tough, in all honesty. If I look at the challenges for the typical, how it challenges typical model of education for us, allowing industry partners in, and where some of our schools have changed their timetables to allow blocks for young people to go out and are willing to do that more and more with a planned effective curriculum moving forward. So those are the types of challenges, really.
That's great, Alex. It's really interesting to hear. And I think, those particularly career practitioners who may be listening to this, hearing what you're saying there about, including the model of careers within that, I think is particularly important. But I suppose, this is where sometimes I think when we talk about technical education, we sometimes get those competing discourses because we get that industry side of needing to fill skills gaps and the idea of, encouraging students and young people to look at, where are the jobs going to be and those type of things. Whereas from a careers perspective, I think we would always take that approach that, your career is your work, your life across the span of your lifetime. It's not something where you may be in the same thing forever. It's not necessarily going to be linear. So, in terms of the CTE model, where does the careers element of it fit in, do you feel? And kind of how does that work around the partnership work that you're doing and the work that you're doing with schools?
So the framework, we obviously have a learning framework, which is around the pathways. What we also have around that as well is a sort of curriculum. So if I'm in primary school, it's about awareness. Careers related learning. How do I know what jobs are out there? How do I know what does that industry mean? So if I'm in a built environment, what does that worker do and why are they in that jacket? And that's about safety. So let's get a handle on that type of thing. As you move sort of into that kind of transition into secondary school, it's about exploring what's actually out there. So it's those little and often reminders that whatever's behind that building, there's somebody in there working, but what is it they do? So it's demystifying the world of work and it's demystifying some of those random roles that I think we all know now. What does that person do? That title is just like, what's going on? I don't think any of us sit there and go at the age of 6, I want to be a data analyst or I want to be this, or then there's some really random roles. So it's just trying to kind of get people to be interested and explore different sort of ideas. It's around their own self-development as well. And I think that's part of that because there is an element of self-learning and lifelong learning that we want to kind of put through this. And I think that's super important. Moving on to then the explore and preparation that young people need to do to be able to choose the right exams that they want to do that are going to help lead into work, but be broad and balanced enough so that you're not putting everything in one basket and then go, well, I don't like that. So if we move earlier up, shove this earlier on in primary school, that's a great way to do that. Obviously getting to those older ages where you're trying to manage your career, you're still preparing, but you're then managing for those next steps. So what jobs are you applying for? What college courses are you applying for? How are you doing that? How have you set that up? What does online recruitment look like these days? Because that's probably very different to how, unless you've gone through COVID recruitment and you've had to do online, very different to the experiences that many people have had turning up for an actual formal interview. How does a group session look on digital? I think those are going to be exciting things for people to think about because I think they'll continue. I don't think they'll disappear now we've got into using them.
No, thanks, Alex. I think that's really good to hear. And again, matches with a lot of the models, that as careers practitioners we would use in terms of those different age stages. But as you say, particularly, it's been emphasised a lot more over the last few years and beyond for a lot of organisations. But that primary focus of, not getting people to say, well, what job do you want to do at the age of 6? But really that exploration and awareness and starting to work out, okay, well, what is the working world? I've got parents who work, I've got family members, friends who work, what is it that they do? So I think it's really good to hear that that's kind of built in a key pillar, I suppose, of the work that you're doing as well.
It's making me want to come into the primary school sessions, actually. I want to come in and hear about this. It's really fun. Okay, so given the current economic political uncertainty in the UK and elsewhere, really, let's be honest, it's very kind of uncharted waters that we're kind of all in at the moment. Do you feel there are any other barriers or challenges in terms of implementing the CT model of education over the coming year and beyond? And particularly thinking about the lifetime skills guarantee that we've just heard about this week as well. Do you see any challenges going forward in addition to what you've previously said?
I think there are massive challenges going forward. I think I don't think there is a clear idea of what that looks like. We could go back to Ken Robinson, creativity's been off there, and we could pick up on that, bless him, rest in peace, Ken. But the blended learning has really got to kind of, I think, come into its own. I think if we're looking at things like problem-based learning, how's that now going to feature? How's that going to play up against? This year is a very different place, I think, in terms of what we need to do with young people because of the way that we've got this fixed structure around exams and learning for exams and sitting exams. It could be huge if there's some shift and change there, but let's see, it might be quite difficult to break away from that. These are very large institutions. We've put a lot of work into our exams. We've got a system there. If it is broken, let's change it. But I mean, I think we've got to see where that goes. I think I'd like to see some improvement in sustainability in vocational education. There's some fantastic models out there in Europe and beyond that are kind of really driving it and get some fantastic results. We've got some great sort of pockets of work going on with our young people. So I think it's all up in the air, to be honest. But I think if we don't make a change, it would be really disappointing. Yeah, is the only kind. I know that doesn't feel like a really strong enough word. We've got a shift. We've got an opportunity to make that shift. We've just got so many people busy thinking about other things. They are thinking about skills. We have got skills for learning. Definitely picking up on sort of where adult skills are coming in as well in terms of the A-levels and picking up A-levels. For me, it's interesting because A-levels are a different way to study than a vocational. We've still got our T-levels out there. We've not kind of hit the road running with them yet, I don't think. And I think COVID's impacted on that quite significantly. We've got this Kickstarter project. There's so much stuff going on there. I mean, that's phenomenal. And it should, when we get the power of collective, of people coming together, 30 different organisations potentially coming together to employ young people, I think that's going to be amazing, because then we're going to see where other people might have not been able to do it, because Bradford's full of very small SMEs and sort of a mid-level companies. So for us, that's a blessing, but it can also be a challenge. So it's allowing them to have a voice and say, well, we need this, we need that, and we need support to develop. So I think that the government getting behind that and doing enough to keep those businesses going and more, I think is super important right this time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've seen some really interesting examples of that. There was one, I can't remember what part of the country it was in, where it was sort of 30 small kind of artisan food producers all kind of coming together under one collective in order to basically hire young people off Kickstarter for kind of marketing, PR, branding purposes. So that was quite interesting. I mean, I think one thing we always like to do kind of at the end of the podcast, Alex, is try and, not maybe force people, but perhaps try and get people to think and maybe provide a bit of a forecast, if they feel comfortable with, about what the next normal might look like within the sector that we're talking about. And I think you mentioned a lot of different things there, particularly around perhaps some of the more kind of rigid elements of the current education structure, particularly around the exam system, and maybe some of the, the elements of change that could happen or that would be particularly positive if they did happen. But I wonder, just as kind of a final thought, what you would, I guess, like the next normal to look like as far as the education system in this country stands at the moment, and are maybe there any predictions you might be willing to make based on what's happening in the current climate?
Yeah, I'm not sure about predictions, but I would love to see entrepreneurial spirit. Young people go home and they're not restricted to curriculum, and they have got some amazing talents. So to have an opportunity to study that in school, to bring your desires. Often we teach people, I've done it before in a practical subject against design technology, whether it's in textiles, whether it's in the workshop, and you are confined to a curriculum. Them having an opportunity to just move away from that slightly and just develop their own skill set would just be amazing, and allowing some time to do that.
Yeah, I think when we had Harvey Morton on the show a few episodes ago, he was saying exactly the same thing on our enterprise special, that, in school he never really felt that he was ever really encouraged to be entrepreneurial, and it was only really when he got to university that there was the capacity to do that. And indeed, for some people, it's not university, it's other elements. It might be college, it might even be just professionals that they've spoken to. But I think you're absolutely right there. And again, we've heard a lot through various kind of guests about things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the idea of bringing in more of those kind of global challenges that are much broader, rather than kind of a more narrow, rigid curriculum. So I think it's really interesting to hear that reflected as well. So Alex, it's been really interesting to hear some of those reflections from your work with CTE. I guess if anyone who's kind of listening to the show back on record is kind of interested in what you've spoken about and wants to find out a bit more, how can they find out more about the work that CTE are doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we've had a soft launch of, probably the best way to catch us is bradfordskills.co.uk, and there is an inbox there. Be the best place.
That's great. What I'll do is I'll put that on the episode notes, so anyone who's listening can kind of pick those up on our Simplecast site after the show. But that brings us very nicely to the end of the show. So Alex, thank you very much for your time today. Thanks for joining us. And if you're listening at home, have a great day.
Thanks, Alex.
Thank you. Great to meet you guys again, and also speak to everyone. Thanks so much for having me.
If you're interested in anything that's been discussed on the podcast, or would like to be involved as a guest or have a topic to share, please get in touch with Helen or I via LinkedIn. Full details can be found in the episode notes on the Simplecast site.